Okay, so one of the first things that you will have noticed when I was given this preview is that 4 new factions have been added. Now, they are new to different extents. Some of them are largely made up of units that were taken from other factions, and they will be expanded upon in the future. But I will go through them in their current state now, one by one, giving each their own video, because I think that it's worth showing what these new factions are all about and how they'll play and etc. Now, I won't obviously be able to display this in a real battle situation, really, so I'll just go through their roster and we'll see what they look like on the field. And I'll start off with Canned, because Canned seem to be the most extensive new faction in terms of new stuff. They obviously do have some units that have been transferred over from Rune, but they have a lot of new stuff as well, and also the way they play is going to be quite niche, so let's take a look at their infantry first of all. So one of the reasons that I feel like Canned, at least in terms of units, are pretty much done. Obviously balancing we'll need to go into a bit more detail, but they are a mobility-based faction, at least as far as I can tell. They're more designed around their ability to use their cavalry and to outmaneuver the enemy, and yet they still have a lot of infantry. Now, starting off down with their lower tier infantry, the Candish Marauders, this is a rather interesting unit because they are effective against armor and they have relatively low stats, but they do scare the enemy. I would suggest these guys, they're basically like a cheap lower tier berserker almost. At least that's what I assume they are. Obviously, I haven't had a great deal of time to test out what all of these are all about, but nonetheless, it's an interesting type of unit. They obviously have very low armor though, so something like a good volley from an archer line will easily deal with these guys, I fear. Obviously, the aesthetic of these guys, you're looking at sort of more Mongolian, Chinese looking units. And stuff like the Haru's light infantry, you're going to be looking at this for your sort of cannon fodder. Moving on to sort of slightly better units, Nomadic Warriors, of course, these guys were a part of Rune. They have been updated slightly visually. They've got these sort of Far Eastern flags on their back, sort of very Shogun 2. Does improve them as well in terms of their looks. They won't be very good against higher tier units, but in terms of a sort of a basic infantry unit, they should do you no wrong. And then there's the Axeman variant, of course, a shock infantry version, a lower tier shock infantry, but they still have their place now more than ever. And then we have the Ito units. Now the Ito militia, the so-called best units in the game. Their stats are quite low. Wooden shields, they're cannon fodder, basically, again. Cheap, but they'll do their job. And then we have the Ito footmen, of course, better. This is a more Chinese-looking unit, at least it certainly, well, the Mongolian Chinese aesthetic is something that I'm not really familiar with, but, they look pretty cool, actually. I do have to say, it's nice to get a bit more variety in the units. Of course, most of the units in Lord of the Rings are either orcs or based around some sort of Western kingdom, like obviously Gondor or Arnor. Now moving on to units that we will have seen before. The Brotherhood of the Sword are new, but the aesthetic you will have seen before from the Brotherhood units of Rune in the last patch. Dual wielding their swords again, focusing more on attack than defense, and that is a theme really of Canned in general. So you've got to be aggressive with Canned. You can't afford to sit back because you don't really have the muscle or you don't really have the ability to attrition people to death with Canned, I would imagine. You need to hit fast and you need to hit hard. Then you have the Ito Assassins. These guys have got very, very high stats. No hit points, but they have high stats. They remind me quite a lot of the Hashari, the Harad have, and I think maybe that's the role they're going for. So that's another option that you have with their, it looks like scythes. That's cool. Then moving on, we have Haru's heavy infantry again. A slightly more beefy unit, similar to the Ito footmen and the nomadic axemen, I believe. So they're going to be pretty tough to break down, I would imagine. The slightly more bulky centre to their infantry. They will probably still not win any attritional battles with some of the more defensive focused factions like Gondor or the Dwarves. They will at least be able to hold while your more deadly and fast units do the job. Variag warriors, they were in Rune before. Sort of a shock infantry that's designed more around killing less armoured units with their sort of large curved swords, more so than the Brotherhood of the Axe, of course. Probably Rune's my favourite unit of runes in the last patch, to be honest with you, so the fact that Can have these guys is a bit of a boon. Very dangerous they were, and I imagine that hasn't changed an awful lot. They, as a shock infantry unit, were very, very strong. There were only a few that were better than them, and that was really only because they had less men in the unit. Now their men have been increased, but the stats have all been reworked, so I will need to go through all of this again, but I can only imagine these guys still being very, very deadly. Ito Warrior Priestesses, of course. Again, this is a very high tier unit. There are only 33 of them, but they have very good stats indeed. The unit model for this will be updated, I've been told, so they may very well look different. Also, they sound like men at the moment, so best we move on. Then we have the archers. Of course, we have low tier archers, and then slightly better archers. These guys look cool, actually. I do like the Variag units with sort of the Far Eastern flags on the back. Again, archers, I would imagine that Canned will be pretty good in the skirmish, although more so with their horse skirmishers, because again, you've got to get that mobility. Then we have these two units of raiders and infantry. Now this is an infantry unit, but they do have bows, so it's quite interesting how there is more of a focus on skirmishers. So your skirmishers probably are going to be pretty good in melee, obviously, apart from the Haru's archers down there. They probably will fold pretty quickly. But I would suggest that with Canned you're going to want archers and horses doing the majority of your work, and then having like a few infantry units to hold the line. But now we'll move on to the cavalry, which is where, as Canned, you're going to need to have your A game on, because this is where most of your power, over other factions anyway, is going to come from. So here we are with Canned's cavalry, and they have got a lot of variety here, which should show you where their focus truly lies. Of course, you have household scouts, which again, kind of like the Candish marauders, they can't form formation. Their stats aren't particularly high, but they are what they are. And if you want to have some cheap cavalry that you can just sort of block the enemy with, they're going to do a pretty good job. They can't form a formation either, which is interesting. I'd like to see these guys in action, actually. So I will test them out, because I'd be interested to see how they actually perform, as opposed to just looking at their stats. Moving on to their regular cavalry, we have the Wind Riders of Can. Now these were a unit that I believe were in the previous patch, or at least a unit very similar to this name. But they have been updated in terms of their unit model, and obviously they are now not part of Rune. Again, a lower tier cavalry unit, but of course now with cavalry being rebalanced, the lower tier of cavalry should be more useful, and they will do a decent job. They're wielding sabers, so they should be pretty good on the melee. At least I'm basing that upon just looking at them like this. Now, Ito Windblades. This is another unit which is intriguing to me, because again, dual wielding on horseback is interesting. I would suggest they are a better version of the Wind Riders of Canned. Now, obviously, defense is not going to be the majority of the Canned cavalry's strong point. You need to, again, have your micro game down, because you could very easily end up losing a lot of your cavalry to enemy skirmishers, or getting them trapped into enemy spears, that sort of thing. So Canned is, I would suggest looking over Canned actually, that they are kind of a higher risk but potentially higher reward variant of Rohan. Because obviously the cavalry is where most of your strength lies. You still have some infantry power, of course, but the cavalry is where the majority of your strength lies, and if you misuse them, you're going to be punished, now more so than ever, because in the previous patch cavalry was strong to the exclusion of everything else, pretty much. Moving on, we have the Ito Retainers, a slightly more defensive-minded unit. They have shields. Again, melee focused with their sabers, you would suggest. And of course the Brotherhood of the Lance. This was a unit that was part of Rune previously. They were exceptionally strong, and I would suggest they're still exceptionally strong. They are, I believe, the strongest cavalry unit that Can have to offer, although I might be wrong about that. It was only a cursory glance, because the Ito cavalry, they look pretty cool as well. But yeah, the Brotherhood of the Lance, they are going to be very deadly off a charge. They might not be as defensible as they once were, but off a charge they're probably even stronger than ever before. Ito cavalry, again, these guys look very, very cool. Sort of very heavily armoured cavalry, the most defensive looking cavalry we've seen so far. Shock cavalry as well with their lances. Moving on to the Variag Cataphracts. Again, this was a unit that was a part of Rune before and now has been transferred over. The horses are variants of the Innes Rim and the mounted versions are the Variag units, so they look fantastic. All of this cavalry looks amazing, actually. Then moving on again, we have the Nerniag cavalry. That name, though, I really should get the pronunciation down. Again, another option that you have. I'm not sure what the different. There are subtle differences between all of these shock cavalry units, and it of course means that you can get around the cost increase problem by having a lot of different types of units. Then we have the start of the plentiful horse archers that can field, and this is again a bit of a focus, I feel. Having horse archers were always a bit hit and miss. I always felt that in vanilla and in Reforged to a lesser extent, the Grey Company were really the only ones that paid for themselves in the long run because they were just too easy to catch, and they were too easy to make redundant, in my opinion. But now I think there'll be a bit of a difference. I feel like if you can use your horse archers as canned in conjunction with your regular cavalry, you will have a great deal of success. And we have the regular mounted raiders, we have the Haruz cavalry. Again, this is sort of your lower tier of unit, but I do like the Mongolian look that they have going on. And then we have the Variag horse archers. I believe this is the only unit in Khan's roster that was in the base vanilla version of Third Age. Perhaps, anyway. But yes, they are here. A sort of mid-tier horse archer. And we have the Haruz horse archers, slightly heavier version of the light cavalry back there. And we have the Nerniag. I know I'm saying that wrong. I feel like a fool. But yeah, again, they look very cool. And all of these units have got a focus on their archery. And finally, we have the Brotherhood of the Bow, which I can only assume this might be a unit. Based on the other Brotherhood units, this might finally be a unit to give challenge to the Grey Company. But again, that's something that I'll have to take a look at in more detail when I come to doing the top 10s when the full version releases for everyone to have a go at, because obviously it's not finished yet. The Flag of Poland is the sigil of Khan at the moment, which will be changed, of course. And that is all of Khan's roster that I've just gone through. So again, they've got a lot of variety, both in infantry and especially in cavalry. And as I said, I feel like they're a sort of harder to use, but potentially higher reward version of Rohan. They've got good shock infantry. Their infantry probably won't win any competitions against some of the better infantry factions, but their cavalry, and particularly their mounted archers in conjunction with their sort of beefy shock cavalry, is going to yield you some good results, I feel. I feel like canned in the hands of a good player will be a nightmare to play against when they're in their finished state. So that is the eastern land of Canned, and next I think we will move on to a potential favourite of everyone's in the Principality of Dol Amroth, who have finally been split off from Gondor, and I hope you'll join me for that one, and I'll see you there.